You know, June is Youth Month, and following the recent statistics which show a 52% unemployment rate, there is great concern in government, business and academia. It's in this context that research has been done by the University of Johannesburg called the Siyakha Youth Assets Study. And to tell us more, we're joined in studio by Prof Lauren Graham, Director at the Center for Social Development in Africa at UJ. Good to have you. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Before we discuss the detail of the study, tell us, some of the top things that we can actually take out of the country that we need to begin working on for the youth.
So we know that these youth unemployment rates are staggering, but that's not for lack of effort on the part of civil society organizations, the state and the private sector. And so what we did in this study is to understand what was happening on the ground, and we looked at 8 youth employability programs. These are programs that are run in local communities largely, and they help young people who, many of whom can't access higher education or colleges, to gain some form of training, technical skills training, workplace readiness training, and soft skills training in preparation for the labour market. And so we wanted to understand what effect were they having in supporting young people as they transition into the labour market.
And what were some of the key findings?
So we were really excited about this. What we found was that when they came into the program, and we tracked them over a number of years, when they came into the program, 11% of them were employed. So we had a very high unemployment rate, and those who were unemployed, most of them had been chronically unemployed, so had been unemployed for longer than a year. By the time they exit the program, 28% of them were working, so that's 2 years after they exited the program. 28% of them were working, and 17% were in further education at a higher level than what they'd been at before. We still have, we then matched the young people who've been through these youth employability programs with a sample from the quarterly labour force survey, and as closely matched as possible sample. And we see that the young people who go through these programs were 11 percentage points more likely to be employed.
Interesting.
So we are seeing some gains, and we think that this has to do with the role that they play in intermediating for young people. It's really difficult to find your way in the labour market as a young person. How do you put your CV together? How do you present for an interview? Where do you look for work? These programs play a really critical role in that.
What are these programs? Because, we're talking about them and they are enhancing and giving the youth a lot more opportunity to go and find jobs. But what are we specifically talking about?
So they all run a combination of technical skills training in various different sectors, soft skills, workplace readiness training. Some of them will bring young people together with employers in an interview process. Some of them place young people into work opportunity experiences. But they're in various different sectors, from welding to social services to business process outsourcing.
And rural areas? Because, that I think is one of the top concerns, because you've got the National Youth Development Agency, you've got YES, but I don't know if they are doing enough for the youth, and perhaps you can address that for us.
Sure. So most of the programs are concentrated in urban areas, but we did have some that were working in rural areas, and interestingly what we see in the rural areas is that the programs that are focusing on soft skills training were more effective for those young people who were outside of the metro areas, and they were more effective for young people who had lower levels of education. So those were really exciting findings. When you ask the question about is enough being done, so what we're seeing here is that these programs taken together can really only reach a small proportion of young people. They're doing good work, but we really need to be expanding our set of services for young people if we really want to make a dent.
How would you create an image of youth unemployment in this country? What are we dealing with? Are we dealing with poor black citizens that have limited basic education, rural areas? Or is it bigger than that? What are we looking at?
It's much bigger than that, and it's a very complex issue. So we are looking at, it is largely Black, African and coloured youth that are affected by youth unemployment, also young women. and young women living in rural areas or young people living in rural areas. But the failures are on the demand side, low job growth, but it is also on the supply side. It's low levels of skills, and our economy does demand higher levels of skills. But these programs are helping young people to skill up enough that they can get into that first entry-level job.
Well, I mean, that's the reality, is because you do know, I mean, we can see that obviously the jobs on offer do not match the amount of youth that are actually looking to get into the market. We know this. But is there enough training for those skills that are actually needed? Are we, as a country, and educating the youth in touch with what is needed out there? And that, I think, is the big question that we need to look at.
Absolutely. And one of the really exciting findings we see in this study is that where programs train for employer demand, those are the programs where we see the greatest success.
Okay.
So if they're understanding what demand, what skills are needed in the sector, and they're training for those are where we're seeing the success.
Yeah. Just finally, let's quickly wrap it up and perhaps give a little bit of positivity in terms of some points that you've actually recommended coming out of this assessment.
I think what we see in both this study and internationally is that the combination of training, that you're not just focusing on technical skills, but that you're helping a whole young person to develop. And that kind of intervention is sorely needed in this country, in local communities. And what these programs are doing, and what others are doing, is really inspiring, and it's something that we really need to invest in and support.
Professor, thanks so much for talking to us. Professor Lauren Graham is the Director at the Centre for Social Development in Africa at the University of Johannesburg, discussing the Siyakha Youth Assets Study. You can go on to their website, I imagine. UJ?
uj.ac.za/CSDA.
Okay, and then you will find the complete study there and its findings as well. Following about 2,000 young people aged between 18 to 35 over a couple of year period, which I think is really fascinating.